The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Forget lockdowns. Tonight we're talking touchdowns. First up, Canadian NASA systems engineer Farah Alibay takes us through the thrilling Mars landing last month and why the rover Perseverance is only the beginning. Then we'll hear how artificial intelligence is making quicker work of some complex tasks in the fight against COVID-19. It's Monday, March 29th, and that's ahead on the agenda. This just in, there are no little green people on Mars. So far, anyway. But there is a vehicle driving around, and soon there will be air traffic too, of a sort. No, it's not science fiction. It is the remarkable work of NASA's Mars 2020 mission, which just last month landed a rover named Perseverance on the Red Planet. And one of the people right in the middle of it all is a French-Canadian systems engineer from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Her name is Farah Alibay, and she joins us now from Los Angeles, California, on this stunning excursion into outer space. Farah, it's a great pleasure to meet you. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
And glad to hear. Let's put some background on the record here for those who are watching and listening right now, and then we'll come back and chat. Here are the key objectives of the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover. They are to explore a geologically diverse landing site, assess ancient habitability, seek signs of ancient life, particularly in special rocks known to preserve signs of life over time, gather rock and soil samples that could be returned to Earth by a future NASA mission, and demonstrate technology for future robotic and human exploration. That's the mission. Why is Percy so special? Let's start there.
Well, Perseverance is looking for signs of ancient life on Mars. So it's the first mission that is actually an astrobiology mission, meaning biology outside of Earth. And so that is a remarkable goal, right? And so Perseverance has landed in an area called Jezero Crater on Mars. Jezero Crater is an ancient dried up lake bed. Specifically, what it had is it used to have a river that fed it water and then a river flowing out of it. And we've landed close to the delta of that river. Now, deltas on Earth, when you look at those types of environments, they have lots of sediments, lots of life. That's where a lot of biodiversity exists. So we're hoping that if there had been life on Mars in the past, that could be a good target. Now, as you mentioned, we're not looking for little green men on Earth. The reason why we're looking for, on Mars, the reason why we're looking for life on Mars is because, we think that about 2 billion years ago, Mars looked like Earth. We know it had liquid water, it had an atmosphere, it had a magnetosphere. And so if we look at Earth 2 billion years ago, here there were microorganisms. We're talking cells or little complex molecules, right? So that's what we're looking for on Mars in that particular environment.
There was a previous rover mission, Curiosity, almost a decade ago. What is the difference between Percy's mission and Curiosity's mission?
Yeah, so Curiosity landed in 2012. I was actually a mere intern when it landed. It's one of the reasons why I fell in love with JPL, the place where I work, because I was an intern there and saw the landing happening, saw the team that landed this thing. But Curiosity was focused on geology, was focused on finding evidence of water on Mars and, ancient water, obviously, and so it was a building block towards Perseverance, but didn't have the same scientific goals. And of course, Perseverance is a upgraded version of Curiosity as well. So we used a very similar design, but we have an extra computer. We have a brand new end effector on our arm with brand new instruments. We have upgraded turret instruments and upgraded wheels too, which are hopefully going to allow us to have much better driving performance on Mars.
Now, Farah, I notice I've on a few occasions used the nickname of the rover, Percy, but I notice you never do. So I'm wondering, have I committed a faux pas here by doing that?
No, it's totally fine. I like the word Percy too. But it's just a habit of calling it Perseverance. But no, it's a sweet name for Perseverance to call it Percy. And we do get attached to rovers on Mars, so it's great to hear people kind of also personify it, because we certainly get really, really attached to our little robots.
Understood. Now, it was built in Southern California. Yes. How long did it take?
Well, it's hard to put an exact number. The idea for Perseverance came along in about 2012, right after Curiosity landed. We were like, okay, what are we going to do next? The actual build started somewhere around 2014 with all the components. And so, if you take it from 2014, that's about 6.5 years. But we were building on things that we had learned from Curiosity, right? So we reused a lot of those components, a lot of that concept. So I feel like with every Mars mission, right, we can put a number and say, yeah, it took about 6 years to build, but it's building on decades of experience and decades of development as well.
And how does it actually send the data that it collects back to us here?
By radio. So we have a couple of antennas on the rover, and then we have these really, really big antennas on Earth. We're talking 34-meter wide antennas, so not like something like a dish on your house or anything. And so that's part of the deep space network here on Earth. We have centers in 3 different places on Earth that allow us to talk to all of our spacecraft in the solar system. But one of the things that's really interesting with radio, right, is that it's electromagnetic emission, and so that goes at the speed of light. But Mars is so far that a signal from Earth to Mars right now takes about 15 minutes to get there at the speed of light, and then another 15 minutes to get back. So we don't do real-time operations on Mars, right? We don't just send a command and then sit there for 15 minutes for it to get there, wait for something to happen, and 15 minutes for it to get back. That would be extremely boring days. What we do instead is that we send batch commands. So we'll send a whole plan for a full day. That will take a little while to get to the rover. The rover does its thing during the day and then sends us back information at the end of the night.
I see. How long did it take the rover to get from Earth to Mars?
It took about 7 months. So we launched on July 30th of 2020, and then we landed on February 18th of 2021.
And how fast does it go?
So, when we were traveling in space, we were going at, millions of miles per day. But on Mars itself, it's actually a fairly slow rover. And that's because, on Mars, we don't have roads, we don't have maps. And so when the rover drives on Mars, and it can self-drive, by the way, it has to build its own maps. It has to take its own images, make decisions about obstacles, and then drive on those maps as it's building the next step. So we can only really drive at about 120 meters per hour. So that's like an American football field per hour. It's pretty slow, but for us, those are blistering speeds. That's the fastest any rover has been able to go on the surface of Mars.
I would like to share the footage of the rover landing on Mars, which was really quite spectacular, and then the celebration at Master Control, which was also pretty spectacular. So let's take a look at that, and then we'll come back and chat.
Skytrain maneuver has started. About 20 meters off the surface.
We're getting signals from MRO. Tango Delta.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars, ready to begin seeking the signs of past life.
You weren't too happy at all about that, were you?
Well, it was, years of work, as we talked about, and months of traveling. And you know what? Those last 7 minutes, which are the time when you enter the atmosphere of Mars all the way down to when you touch the ground, we call those the 7 minutes of terror, because that's a fully automated sequence when you have to, you're coming in really, really fast towards Mars, and you have to slow down to a few meters per second to touch down safely. And there is nothing we can do, right? We talked about the fact that the radio signal takes so long to get to Mars. So everything has to be automated. We were just watching the results happening. And I can tell you, I was pacing around Mission Control. We were supposed to stay at our desks and look all proper, and I could not. I was so stressed out. So definitely, I think for all of us, when we heard that moment, touchdown confirmed, I still get chills watching that video with you, right? It's kind of like it takes me right back, because it was years of work and for that one moment, right? That's like completely out of control at that point. But it all worked out, and obviously we're having a great time on Mars right now.
I asked the question about how you felt about the whole thing because on the one hand, as you point out, a ton of work goes into this moment, and obviously everybody wants it to be successful. On the other hand, there are no people on that mission, right? There's not an astronaut in a cockpit somewhere. And I wonder if you've ever had a chance during your career to compare notes with other people who've been inside master control when there have been people and when they do bite their nails because it's life and death of a different way. Have you ever had those conversations?
Yeah, I have. And of course, it's completely different, right? So when we talk about human systems, they have an extra level of redundancy. They try and reduce the risk a lot more, right? Like landing on Mars, this was only, maybe the 7th or 8th time that we've landed on Mars. We don't do that all that often, right? Launching astronauts to space, we do that a lot more often. There's a bigger test campaign that goes into that. In fact, part of our mission is to help pave the way for humans. We're learning what it takes to land on Mars. We're learning about the Martian atmosphere, for example, to eventually pave the way. So it's a very different game when we're talking about humans. But of course, when you're talking about humans, it's all about human safety. The stakes are much higher. But still, it's not to diminish the stakes that are, for these types of missions. It's still years of work, thousands of people in the entire world watching. But of course, the severity of things going wrong is much less. And I think this is about as much as my heart can take, honestly, right now.
Okay, well, the last thing I want to do is give you a heart attack in the middle of this interview. So let's change focus here for a second. How do you intend to get the material that the rover will collect on Mars back to Earth, and when?
So right now, Perseverance is going to be driving around the surface of Mars. It's going to be looking for these varied samples. And on board the rover, we have a caching system. So our end effector has a coring drill that will take samples and put them into tubes. Those tubes will get analyzed and then sealed. And then eventually, when we find, when we have enough samples, we call that a cache, we will deposit that cache on the surface of Mars. And then the goal is that we would send another mission to go get those samples. So we would launch a mission to land on Mars, go fetch those samples, put them in a little rocket, and bring those samples back to Earth. So you think like launching a rocket on Earth is hard? We're going to try and do this from Mars. And that is all brand new technology. We've never launched a rocket from another planet. So, we're already working on that mission. The current goal is for that to launch likely around 2026. So right now, our timeline has us bringing those samples back in the early 2030s, probably around 2031. We'll see how that, we have to invent technology. So we're going to see how that goes. And I know that for listeners, right, you're like 10 years from now, that's how long it's going to take you to get these samples back. But for us, right, it's just, like I said, we're paving the way. We're trying to figure this out. And 10 years in aerospace is it's actually not that long, considering how many strides we have to get through to be able to bring these things back.
Well, it's basically the amount of time John F. Kennedy said, we're going to put a man on the moon, and then it happened a decade later. That's how these things work, eh?
Yeah, that's about right.
I want to clarify as well, the rover's going to be there for, what, 2 years entirely?
Forever.
Oh, the rover's staying forever.
Yeah, the rover doesn't come back, right? So once we, and I know that's like a little bit sad when you think about it. You're like, oh, Percy, you're staying on Mars forever. But that's how it works, right? We send the rover there and we landed it, and we don't have a way to bring it back. It's too heavy to launch back. And really, Perseverance was designed for Mars, and so that's where she should live. But the core mission for Perseverance is 2 Earth years, 1 Mars year. And so by that, what we mean is that we want to collect all of those samples, all of those interesting samples in those first 2 years so that we can convince ourselves that we have something interesting to bring back, right? But we certainly expect the mission to last a lot longer than that. The mission is designed with margin to last at full performance for 2 years. But for example, Curiosity landed on 2012. It was a 2-year designed 2-year mission. Mm-hmm. And now in 2021, it's still operational. So we will continue to talk to Perseverance and continue to operate it for as long as it's alive. Basically.
Gotcha. Okay, here's a bit of an odd question, but I want to know exactly what you do. What's your job?
Yeah, so my role, I'm a systems engineer, and I kind of always say that I'm a bit of a jack of all trades. I work on all sorts of different aspects of the mission. So, leading up to launch on this mission, I was working on the mobility system for the rover. So, I was working on all of the testing that has to do with making sure essentially that the rover doesn't get lost on Mars. There is a copy of Perseverance called Optimism that we use here on Earth in the Mars yard, which is essentially like a big sandbox where we do all our testing. So I was a part of that team. Now on Mars, I'm part of the operations team, and I work not only in day-to-day operations, but I'm also the integration lead for the Ingenuity helicopter. So my job is to coordinate all of the activities between the Perseverance rover and the Ingenuity technology demonstration.
And the Ingenuity helicopter is what?
Okay, so it's a tiny helicopter that's currently tucked in under the rover, and it's what we're going to do is we're going to attempt the first powered flight on the surface of Mars. So think of it as it looks a little bit like a drone. It's a little helicopter with counter spinning blades, and we are going to try to fly for the first time on another planet.
And there it is. It doesn't look like it's that. Now you call that a helicopter, even though I mean it doesn't look like any helicopter we're accustomed to seeing.
It's a Martian helicopter, yep. And it's, to give you an idea, it's only, it weighs about 4 pounds, so 1.2 kilograms, and the blades are about 4 feet long, so about 1.2 meter long. So, and that is just about the right ratio, we hope, to be able to fly on Mars. The Martian atmosphere is only 1% of the Earth's atmosphere. Now, gravity is about a third, but air is what we need for lift. So it's certainly a really interesting challenge to even attempt to fly on Mars, let alone the fact that it all has to be automated and that we have to land safely on the surface where we don't have a nicely flattened out helipad. We've found an area that we think is flat and safe. There's all sorts of challenges involved with flying on Mars.
I think we got some viz of it doing its thing. Sheldon, you want to give that a whirl? Okay, who or what is operating that thing?
So it is all automated. So what we do is that we will plan these flights ahead of time, and we have a team we have pilots on our team who will design the flight path, and we send instructions to Ingenuity actually via Perseverance. We send them to Perseverance, and Perseverance can communicate with Ingenuity, and we will tell it, okay, on this day you're going to wake up and you're going to fly at this time in this particular pattern, and then during that time Perseverance will be doing observations, taking videos of it, and also communicating with it to understand how those flights are going. So that is a huge challenge. We don't have an onboard pilot. We don't have a way to react in real time to any anomalies. We have to rely on the helicopter fixing itself and landing itself back down if there's an issue.
Well, that was my next question. If something does go wrong, who fixes it and how?
There is kind of no way to fix it. That's the challenge of Mars, right? Is we automate things as best as we can. We build in what we call fault protection of, okay, if certain things happen, we teach, the helicopter how to react. But if anything goes out of our control, well, there's really nothing we can do. But that's kind of part of technology demonstrations. We're trying something new, bold, and, we're pushing the edges of technology. And sometimes that might come with failure, and that's okay, because even if we fail, we've learned something. We've learned something about what it takes to fly on Mars, and that's the whole point of this tech demo.
Mm-hmm. Now, I gather next month, Ingenuity is going to try to become the first flight ever on another planet. Is that right?
That is correct.
What's the latest on that?
The first powered flight on another planet. We have had balloons. The Soviet Union and the Europeans did have balloons on Venus, but this would be the first powered flight. So right now, Ingenuity is tucked in under the belly of the rover. We're actually at the location. We found an area where we want to fly, and the rover has now reached the location where we're going to drop the helicopter. So over this week here, what we're going to be doing is the helicopter is currently horizontal. So we're going to slowly deploy the helicopter. There's all sorts of restraints that we have, and we have to get it vertical and then drop it on the surface of Mars. And once we've dropped it on the surface of Mars, we'll back away from it. We'll place the rover at what we call a rover observation location. So it's an area away from it where we can watch all the flights. We're going to do all sorts of checkouts with the helicopter. That's our commissioning process. And then we hope here that like in early to mid-April, that we'll be attempting that first flight on Mars.
How do you know? I mean, I guess I want to know how you, if you're testing something on Earth, how do you know that the helicopter is going to react the same way on a different planet with a different atmosphere and different gravity and all that?
That is, sometimes it's just as hard to build our testing system as it is to build the system themselves. So the way that we tested the helicopter on Earth is that we actually use what we call a thermal vacuum chamber to pull out atmosphere. We can basically suck the atmosphere out of that chamber and backfill it with just about the atmosphere level that Mars would have. And then the engineers on that team also built a gravity offset system that was able to, to pull out about a third of the gravity. So it kind of like loosely held the helicopter to reduce its weight to 1/3 of its weight, 1/3 of the weight that it would be on Earth. So to give it its Martian weight. And that's how we did all of our testing. So for some of those easier flights, we were able to, our first flight will essentially be a hop. We'll fly to about 3 meters high and hold and then land again. We were able to test something similar on Earth. But for some of the longer flights, we have to rely on physics and hope that what we have in testing and what physics tells us will apply, and we'll see how that goes. But there's certainly challenges with Mars, right? Like the weather can vary, the winds are a little strange. So we're doing the best we can with the information we have, but we'll certainly learn a lot from these experiments.
And just to show that you engineers are not all brain, but you're actually quite a bit of heart as well, I'm going to ask our director to bring up this next picture, because here's a picture of the Wright brothers, who, of course, took the very first flight back in 1903. There's a neat little homage to the Wright brothers that is a part of this whole thing. Do you want to tell us what that is?
Yeah, so we actually have a small piece of the fabric from the Wright brothers flyer, the first flight on Earth. We got a little piece of that, the fabric from that flyer, and it is installed on the helicopter, and it is now on Mars. So we're taking some of that heritage from that first flight and took it with us to honor that achievement on Earth and bring that to hopefully what will be the first flight on Mars.
That is fabulous. Can I ask you this? I've heard you use the expression, I'm on Mars time, or I'm on Martian time. What do you mean by that when you say that?
Yeah, so remember a little bit earlier when I talked about the fact that there's delay in communication and that we don't operate things in real time. So I mentioned that we operate things we make a plan for the rover and then send that in batches. So what we actually do is that we work during the Martian night. I got a PhD and I'm working the Martian night shift. Not quite sure where I went wrong there. But so what we do is every night when Perseverance goes to sleep, she sends us a whole bunch of information, images, data, tells us how her day's been, basically. We analyze all of that. And then as a team, we prepare a plan for the next sol. A sol is a Martian day. And so we do that overnight. And then in the morning, when Perseverance wakes up, we send her that information. So my day starts at about 1800, 6 p.m. every night on Mars. Great. Okay, that's the Martian night shift. That just means working nighttime, right? Well, the problem is that a Mars day, which is a full rotation of that planet, is 24 hours and 40 minutes. So that means that even though I start my day on the same time on Mars every day, my day shifts by 40 minutes every day on Earth. So for example, today I'll be going in at 4 p.m. Tomorrow I'll be going in at about 4:40, then 5:20, and so on. So I basically have 40 minutes of jet lag every day, which can be quite difficult for my body.
I want to check out something that I heard about you, and since I've got the source right here, let's find out if it's true. I'm told that you wanted to be an archaeologist, which is, I guess, about the exact opposite in some respects of what you're doing right now. And then you met Tom Hanks, and that changed everything. Is that true?
Yeah, I wish I had met him in person, but yeah, that is true. So I grew up in the '90s, so I grew up with Jurassic Park, and really wanted to be an archaeologist. And then one day when I can't really remember if I was 8 or 9 or something, but I watched Apollo 13, and that movie changed my life. I think it not only was it exploration and gave me, made me want to become an astronaut, which is still a dream of mine, but also just seeing the teams work together, talk about having to come together to save humans and the stakes that are involved with missions like these. I just remember the scene where they have to fix something and they throw everything they have on the table and literally have to get a square peg in a round hole type of problem. And I just remember the team working together to achieve the impossible. And I thought, this is the kind of thing I want to be part of. And space was just so fascinating. I think what fascinates me the most is that what we do is beyond what a single person can do. And that's the beauty of engineering and STEM as a whole, is that people come together to do things that are greater than themselves. And that tied with that idea of exploration. I fell in love with that when I was young, and that's how I ended up pursuing this path.
It's interesting you had such a positive reaction to that because, of course, I mean, I remember that mission well. I'm a lot older than you. And that's the one where they all almost died. And yet you did not get scared off by that. You embraced that. How come?
Yeah, it's funny because I remember my brother also watching this movie with me, and he was really into space at that time. And that's when he turned away and was like, there's no way I'm ever going to be an astronaut, because he was so scared. But for me, yeah, yes, it's scary, right? Yes, things went wrong. But isn't it incredible that with all those things that went wrong, we still got those astronauts back safely to tell the tale? And that is incredible, because there's more than one thing that went wrong in that mission. And to me, that is amazing. And also, if we think about it, yes, tragic things have happened, and yes, things have gone wrong. But if you look at how much we've achieved in the past 50, 60 years in space exploration, it is incredible. And I think it's a highlight of human achievement that we've made such progress. And now, we're talking about flying in other worlds. We have humans living in orbit of space. That's science fiction, right? Almost.
Farah, I have time left for one more question, and I'm not going to pretend that it's the most important question I'm going to ask you. But since you are from Joliette, Quebec, I do need to know, what's your favorite hockey team in the NHL?
I'm a Habs fan through and through.
Farah, how in heaven's name did you get booked on this show? I have a rule about Habs fans and this program, and I just don't understand it. Well, somehow my security system is clearly not working very well anymore. But anyway, it was an absolute delight to meet you, and we wish you just great good fortune with all of your endeavors. And thank you for sparing so much time for us here on TVO tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and I hope everyone will be following along with Ingenuity's first flight here over the next month.
Amen to that. There are surely not many silver linings in this pandemic, but one of them is that in less than a year, not only did science manage to decode the virus, but multiple vaccines were also designed, tested, and are now out there making a difference. That's just one example where the use of artificial intelligence helps speed up the fight against COVID-19. With us now for more on how AI is helping, from the provincial capital in Riverdale, we welcome Nahed Kurji, co-founder of the biotech firm Cyclica that uses AI to accelerate drug development. And in the annex, Marzia Qassimi, assistant professor of computer science and medicine at the University of Toronto. She's also the CFAR AI chair at the U of T's Vector Institute, CFAR being the former Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. And we are delighted to have you two with us on the program tonight with an interview about what the heck you two are up to, because it's very far-reaching, futuristic stuff that's happening right now in the present. Marzia, get us started here. What are you actually working on right now?
I think a lot of the things I'm working on are trying to help people report their syndromes online. We know that syndromic surveillance is one way that we can supplement with testing. It's hard sometimes to get a test in a reasonable time frame. And so if people can self-report how they're feeling, that can give us a better idea of how the pandemic might be going, especially with new variants. And I've also been working on collecting a large number of chest x-rays from people in different countries that have COVID-19 and comparing that to people who have pneumonia. And that way we might be able to do better early onset prediction, especially with the new variants, trying to see if there's a big difference.
Do you have a little visitor who wants a cameo at the same time here?
I do. We're all virtual schooling, right? And so I have the youngest who's here.
You can feel free to introduce at any time if you want. We understand.
I probably will at some point. I think that the largest things that I have been trying to focus on are sub areas where machine learning can actually help. So, for example, in early recognition of something like COVID, in a chest x-ray if we're in a resource-constrained setting, or in self-reporting of syndromes where we know that we can't get complete testing coverage.
Understood. Okay, we're going to follow up on those two things as we go along here. Nahid, let's start with you. First of all, Cyclica, what is that and what is its mission?
Yeah, thank you for having me here today. So Cyclica is a Toronto-based AI for drug discovery company. We are a biotech company that deploys novel methods in computational techniques like AI to speed up the way in which medicines are discovered. And it's a very exciting space. And the work that we've been doing in COVID vis-a-vis the application of AI has been pretty intense over the past 12 to 14 months.
Okay, just follow up on that if you would. How do you actually use artificial intelligence to help us make progress against COVID-19?
Yeah, so let me quickly talk about a patient journey. We're all patients. Everybody listening to this is a patient. And when we go to the doctor and the doctor diagnoses us with a certain type of disease, whether it be COVID or something else, they're generally trying to understand the drivers of that disease. And then researchers for that specific disease are focused on designing medicines to combat it. And generally, the middle point of designing a medicine for a disease, they're focusing on designing a medicine for a protein. A protein is the biological driver of that disease. And we use AI to speed up the way in which medicines, chemistry, interact with the biology, the proteins for a given disease. Now, what we've done in the COVID environment, starting off at the end of January of 2020, we kicked off a COVID task force at Cyclica to understand our contribution of using our AI techniques for repurposing drugs that exist for COVID biology. That task force then published some papers in early February on a deep learning AI-based resource to identify repurposed drug candidates for COVID-19. We then opened up a COVID stimulus plan where we engaged with the academic community globally, and we kicked off over 20 collaborations to use our techniques for that specific reason. And one of them was a collaboration with the University of Toronto that was CFAR funded. And in this project, which was led by CFAR Ariely Global Scholar Jean-Philippe Julien from the University of Toronto Sick Kids, we and a group of researchers used our AI platform to identify existing safe drugs that could be repurposed to treat COVID-19 patients. And what we found is we've narrowed down to a list of 15 top drug candidates, and we've identified at least one approved drug to date with more plausible drugs that can be repurposed for treating COVID-19, which active work is underway. So it's been really exciting and, again, funded and supported by CFAR, which have done some incredible work supporting innovation over the past 12 to 18 months.
And one more quick follow-up. What do you hope those drugs ultimately will be able to do?
So there's two things. There's number one, what's immediately right in front of us for COVID. And while there's vaccines being rolled out, there's still therapies that are required for those that get sick. So number one is, what is the impact that we can have immediately to attenuate the illnesses that are being experienced? And number two is, what can we learn from this environment to lessen the severity of a future infectious disease that is not as anticipated like COVID was? And so how can we come together, and what are the methodologies that we can bring together in collaboration with other institutions to make the innovation pipeline much faster?
Gotcha. Okay, Marcia, I think we're at a point now where we have such expectations of what artificial intelligence is capable of that we don't necessarily understand that there are also some obvious limitations about what it can and can't do. Can you help fill in those blanks for us about whether we need to temper our expectations in this regard?
So I do think that we need to temper our expectations. And what I mean is when you design these high capacity models, these deep neural networks, whether they're convolutional, working on images, recurrent, working on text, or working on tabular data, they are often very fragile. And what I mean is they understand the example space that they've been shown. And in many other domains, we have billions of images of dogs and cats, for example, from different countries and different settings, in snow, indoor lighting, outdoor lighting, different angles, different poses. And so now these models can tune all of their parameters to understand this is generally what a dog looks like in many different settings. That's not the space that we operate in healthcare. We don't have a bunch of healthy chest x-rays. We don't have a bunch of healthy human data. And so when we're showing a machine learning model, not just sick people, but often the most data from the very sickest people, they're going to become slightly more fragile than I think we've learned to expect a lot of these systems in other settings can be. And so we need to be very cautious about auditing the models. And when we design them, making sure that there's robustness baked in.
So this is a limitation that you have observed in terms of AI's capabilities. Does it give you pause as to how successful you think your endeavors can be by the end of the day?
I think that as a researcher, I have so much optimism about where AI and machine learning can take medicine, but that's on the research side. I don't think that many of the technologies we develop are ready for deployment yet, because deployment has other considerations. Humans are using these systems on other humans. And so I think you have to be significantly more careful when you swap from a research analysis to a real deployment in a human setting.
Now, Hed, I wonder if I could follow up in this regard. I know lots of people watching this right now are wondering why so many of the world's truly, we thought, wonderful institutions were unable to see this COVID-19 train coming down the tracks more than a year ago. And it kind of caught us off guard. Do you anticipate that the kind of work that you're involved in right now might be able to help us predict seeing that train coming down the tracks ahead of time so we don't get caught so flat-footed next time?
Yeah, so there's two comments I'd like to make. Number one is I fully agree with everything that was just stated before, and it's a very important limitation of AI that it's not the silver bullet. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. In terms of your specific question, we at Cyclica are not in the business of predicting the next outcome, but there's so much work that is being done by government institutions, by nonprofit organizations, as well as by life science technology-driven companies to start predicting next infectious disease outcomes. I'd say more than just the prediction, it's how do we get ahead of it and minimize the effect that it will inevitably have. There's going to be another infectious disease. There's some wonderful work being done by Google's DeepMind in using their AI techniques to understand the biological drivers of disease, such that when new infectious disease, where there's not an ample amount of data on that disease, like COVID early in 2020, that we can get ahead of it and start sparking a new wave of innovation to stymie its impact so it doesn't shut down the global economy. So in terms of what Cyclica is doing and predicting it, that's not our business, but there's so much happening in the world on that. Our business is all around when it does exist, what can we do to create medicines faster or get those to patients in a much more expeditious time frame.
Gotcha. Marzi, maybe I'd get you on that too. How much of your mission do you see as being able to be more predictive in how you handle future pandemics?
A lot of what my research group is doing right now is trying to understand when we can categorize data as being out of distribution, which is a technical term meaning it doesn't look like the data we've been seeing before. I think the eventual result of that kind of research could be identifying when we're seeing patients that seem like they're not from the distributions we're expecting. This isn't a normal flu season, for example. But in order to do that, we would need a well-aligned sort of set of international data, right? Because as this pandemic spread, we wouldn't have seen anything out of distribution in North America, for example, until much later on. And so that would require collaboration so that we can have alerts that tell us that this is coming down the line from another country.
Nahin, you look like you wanted to make an additional comment on that.
No, that's all very well stated. When I think about the limitations of AI, it comes down to the reliance on data. So AI is glamorized, it's glorified, people are very excited about it. But the reality is, when the data is not of high quality, when there's not a lot of it, and when it's not relevant to the specific research problem, the limitations of AI become quite clear. Computers are very fast, and this is relevant for parsing through millions or billions of data points, but they're also lacking creativity. They're lacking intuition. And so that comes back to my previous point that AI is not the silver bullet. It simply can't be. And it is best when it is, it augments, especially in the space that I think about frequently, which is healthcare, when it augments a healthcare practitioner, whether it be a doctor on the front line, whether it be a researcher thinking about new medicine discovery or a researcher trying to understand the biology. AI is best when it augments those people. It's not going to replace, and certainly not in context when there's a lack of data across the three pillars that I just mentioned.
Well, to that end, I actually have something from what they used to call the British Medical Journal, now just BMJ, on what, they're sort of facetiously asking the question here, what does AI stand for? Artificial intelligence or augmenting inequality? Okay, I want to read this excerpt here and then we'll come back and chat. Sheldon, if you would, let's put this quote up here. Among the most damaging characteristics of the COVID-19 pandemic has been its disproportionate effect on disadvantaged communities. As the outbreak has spread globally, factors such as systemic racism, marginalization, and structural inequality have created path dependencies that have led to poor health outcomes. Artificial intelligence technologies, quantitative models that make statistical inferences from large data sets, are an important part of the health informatics toolkit used to fight contagious disease. AI is well known, however, to be susceptible to algorithmic biases that can entrench and augment existing inequality. Uncritically deploying AI in the fight against COVID-19 thus risks amplifying the pandemic's adverse effects on vulnerable groups, exacerbating health inequity. Okay, that's a pretty strong charge, but Marcia, let's get some discussion going on that. What do you think?
I think it's an accurate charge. I don't think that there's any exaggeration there. So the issue is that when we do science, there's many stages in the pipeline where bias can creep in. So starting from what kind of science do we fund? What kind of diseases are we actually studying? There are several diseases that are just understudied because there's no funding to study those diseases because they affect minorities or minoritized groups. The second is once you've funded a study, maybe we're studying COVID, when you recruit people, often you recruit from those who are convenient. But if you're an academic researcher, what's convenient? Maybe your student population. That's not really a representative group. It's not often diverse. And then even if you have a diverse sort of representative group, we know that bias can creep in the way that we define outcomes, in the way that we code algorithms to learn about the mean of a distribution rather than the tails or the median. And then when you deploy something, often there's other considerations, like if an algorithm agrees with what my own intuition is, maybe I have my own unconscious biases, I'll listen to it. But if it contradicts something I think, then I'm not going to listen to it. And so it's only going to further entrench my negative biases when it agrees with me, and then I won't listen to it when it tries to contradict the negative biases I have. And so I think that there are a lot of dangers to naively deploying AI. I also think that I get pitched a lot of AI solutions to pandemic problems, like, why don't we build a machine learning system to detect face masks in public and, figure out who's wearing and who's not? And my comment is, that seems like a public health problem. Why don't you just give people face masks and continuous public messaging that's consistent about their use?
All right, Nahid, if all of what Marcia says are and obviously I think they are, realistic dangers as we go forward, as BMJ has pointed out as well. What does everybody plan to do about this?
Yeah, so in addition to my capacity as co-founder and president CEO of Cyclica, I'm also one of the co-founders, board members, and executive officers of the Alliance for Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare. And increasingly over the past 12 to 18 months, what we've been talking a lot about is not just about quality, quantum, and relevance of data, but also fairness of data. And within the healthcare space, with applications in disease diagnostic, drug discovery and development, decision support, patient care, disease management, AI is fast becoming an industry standard. And the intent of AI is to help healthcare providers make more objective decisions and provide more effective care. That is it. And while there are many real and potentially benefits of using AI in general, an important risk is flawed or controversial decision making. And that's caused by human bias embedded in AI outputs. And a big example of this is, there's many examples. You think about HR and how AI algorithms have pointed HR specialists to people that are biased towards the way in which they think and not to other ways. In the healthcare space, patients of color in emergency rooms are less likely to receive pain management compared to white patients. And this has been done via systematic review of pain management studies. An August 2020 article in the Journal of American Medical Informatics pointed to the dissemination of underdeveloped and potentially biased models in response to novel coronavirus. And so what does this mean? The most frequent problems encountered were underrepresentative data samples, high likelihood of model overfitting, imprecise reporting of study populations. And the consequence of all of this was that there is a certain marginalized group of people who are simply not getting the care and the treatment that they required.
In which case, Marcia, do you know whether or not your healthcare community is aware enough of this to make sure that it is not handcuffed by it?
I don't think that we are aware enough yet. I think we are raising the bar. So I do think that now there's a much more general awareness of the potential biases when you deploy a model. I am really concerned about the potential knock-on effects of biases that we don't catch, right? Getting more diverse data is not a simple 1 month fix, right? This is something that's going to require a lot of time and a lot of effort. I also think that it's not always true that our intent when we deploy something in a healthcare setting is to improve patient care. A lot of times it's to optimize billing, or maybe to give doctors more time, or maybe to automate a specific hospital logistics process. And so the problem is we're dealing with a human process, and it's not always clear what is meant to be optimized when a human is performing something. And so if we say, well, look at what the humans are doing, just do that. That seems to be working for them. Do it faster, do it more efficiently, do it without a person that I can sort of argue with. Now I have an algorithm that has the sheen of objectivity, but it's just embedding, exactly as Nahid has said, the human biases that were already in the data that we trained it with. And so I think we just need to be careful when we look at the data that we have, the models that we're training, the outputs that we get, and the way that those will be used, that we're thoughtful about how we're going to deploy these models. And again, I'm a huge optimist about the progress that AI can make. We're clearly dealing with a medical system that's overloaded. It's not as if there isn't opportunity. We just need to be careful about how we take advantage of this kind of technology.
Can I just understand, Marcia, what that means when you say we've got to be careful about it? How do you, in fact, go about mitigating the bias in AI models that you're clearly concerned about?
We definitely need more data. We definitely need to develop better techniques to de-bias models when the data itself is biased. And finally, I'm a huge fan of regulatory bodies that are trying to understand how best to evaluate AI. And so the FDA has a clearance program for how to evaluate medical AI before it can be considered sort of cleared and okay to be in a new setting. I think that we should have very robust definitions as different countries who have different populations of what we think counts as being a safe algorithm for deployment, because that doesn't just hold sort of researchers to the same bar that we would like society to be held to, that also incentivizes companies to invest in research that will clear a specific robustness bar.
Okay. Nahid, let's open up our discussion a little bit further here and talk about the current landscape for AI in Canada. How are we doing vis-a-vis the rest of the world?
So, controversially, Canada has been exceptionally good for decades at research and invention. Historically has not been as good at the innovation and commercialization of that research. I'd say that has changed over the past 5, 7, 10 years, and we're on a steady stream of what we're seeing is legitimate technologies being commercialized and having global consequences in a positive way. AI is having, I'd say, the vectors of influence of AI globally are pointing to Canada. The beltway between the University of Waterloo all the way up to Montreal, work being done at the University of Alberta, and all the way down in Vancouver. And when you look at the research that's happening, much of that is then being commercialized in entities that are having global impact. Let's think about what the foundation, the CFI Foundation, SFI Foundation has funded over the past 12 to 18 months in COVID. There's a number of big data companies that are deploying new technologies to either understand the drivers of disease as well as on the diagnostics, as well as the drug discovery. And as I mentioned, CFAR has been at the front and center of that, funding a number of programs, much of which are not just on the research side. Yes, there's a lot, but much of it is important on the commercialization side. And the last thing I'll say, there's a number of companies that one could mention, but those companies are now attracting global investment capital. And investment capital is critically important because that sparks more innovation. And over the past 12 to 18 months, with the spotlight of the world on healthcare and on AI and its impact that it can have in healthcare, we're seeing an increased flow of capital to support this innovation strategy. And so I'm very bullish, the current landscape as well as the future landscape, private, public, as well as global institutions continuing to support innovation in Canada.
Marcia, can I get you on that? What do you think makes Canada particularly attractive for AI at the moment?
I think that we have, there's a joke in the machine learning community that there's a Canadian mafia in machine learning. And it's sort of based in reality that we have some of the most impressive researchers in deep learning specifically in the world in Canada. There's no other place that has sort of this large set of foundational deep learning researchers, and that's attracted a lot of young talent in the research space. So I think in terms of AI, we are very well placed to do innovation. I think in terms of AI and health, we need to seriously vamp up the modernization of our healthcare system. We're in a national health system that doesn't share data between provinces. We don't currently record race in our electronic healthcare record system. We can't easily check whether more Black Canadians are dying than white Canadians. And so we need to vamp up the health side of what we have because the AI resources are there and excited to engage.
Is there, in your judgment, an inevitable clash between the academic side of this and the entrepreneurial side of this?
Not necessarily. I think a lot of times, specifically with machine learning, these companies come out of somebody's PhD. And so you have a lot of startups that are trying to take technology that was pushed to sort of the furthest it could be in a research setting, and then bring in the practical considerations that are necessary in a deployment. And so they're going to do that in a more stable corporate environment. And so I think that there's a natural synergy that happens, and we're seeing a lot of that in Toronto now and across Canada.
Nahid, I'll give you the last minute on that. Navigating between the academic and entrepreneurial side. How's it going?
Yeah, increasingly seeing more collaboration, a propensity to translate research and bring it commercially so that it can have that impact. I'd say when we started Cyclica about 7 or 8 years ago, my experience was that wasn't necessarily the attitude. Over the past number of years, and importantly over the past 12 to 18 months, that attitude has changed, and you can walk the hallways of leading academic institutions in Canada, whether it be in Montreal, in Mila and McGill University, University of Montreal, University of Toronto with the prominent and globally impactful Vector Institute, as well as University of Alberta. And you can walk those halls and people aren't just talking about publishing the next paper and talking about what's the impact for a siloed research project, but now what can we do about that and how can we build teams to do that at scale? And that level of conversation to me is fairly unique, gives me confidence of continuing to build out Cyclica in Canada. We had the opportunity of going to the US many years ago, raising much more money. We said, we're going to invest in Canada. We believe the best talent at the intersection of science, technology is here. And we've gone from a 4-person company to now close to a 60-person company, with a vast majority of those being Canadian-based and educated. And we're seeing the impact of the innovation and the commercialization very strongly centered on the Canadian innovation strategy.
Well, it's so nice to see the academic and the entrepreneur getting along so well here on TVO tonight. And Marcia, I guess we owe a thank you to your co-host who is sitting beside you just out of camera range there for allowing you actually to get through the interview pretty well unscathed. So well done on that.
She's being remarkably quiet, yes.
Well done on that. Marcia Gassemi, Assistant Professor, University of Toronto, Nahid Kurji from Cyclica. It's good of both of you to join us on TVO tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
And that is the agenda for Monday, March 29th, 2021. Tomorrow, we've got something quite special, a feature interview with China's ambassador to Canada. And we'll follow that up with a conversation about this country's currently complicated relationship with the Middle Kingdom. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.